So to set up your NMR tube, so your tube is going to be like this. If you have a solid, you're going to put a little bit of solid in the bottom. So unlike our 300 megahertz instrument, this instrument is a little bit lower field instrument. So as you're running your samples, you need them a little bit more concentrated. So I'm going to put a little bit of my sample in my tube. And what I would recommend is that if you have a liquid, you take your pipettes and you add your sample to your tube. So you can use the plastic pipettes, and when you're done, clip the top off and then use that as a funnel to add more solution, or you can get a glass pipette to act as a funnel. We don't want to use the original NMR pipette that you have and then keep dipping into the solution, or you're going to contaminate the original solution. So you're basically going to get your NMR tube. You're going to put a little bit of your sample in there. You're then going to get the NMR NMR solvent that you are told to use. So in this case for Organic 1, our first synthesis lab, we're going to use deuterated acetone. In your fifth lab, we had used chloroform. Sometimes you might use deuterated DMSO. But note the solvent that you're going to have. Then your next thing that you're going to need to do is take your NMR solvent, add it to your sample, and you want it to be a total height of about 6 to 6.5 centimeters tall when you add your solvent. So when you're running your sample, it's the right height. Try to avoid anything more than about 6 to 6.5 centimeters, or your tube might be too heavy for the carousel. If you're putting your sample in manually, that probably doesn't matter. But on the carousel, it might get too heavy. So let's take a brief trip over to set up a sample. So here I've gotten my NMR tube. I'm going to put my goggles on. And from this, I'm going to put some sample in my NMR tube. I actually have the sample tube. I'm going to grab a spatula because my sample is actually a solid. I'm going to add a little bit of my sample. So I've added a little bit of my sample to my tube. Now, I want you to notice it might be a little bit hard, but there's samples on the top of my tube, so I don't want to contaminate that. So I can take a glass pipette and use it as a funnel so that if I have to dip my pipette back in, I'm not contaminating it. Or alternatively, you can take one of these plastic pipettes, especially if you're using a liquid sample, you can pipette the liquid sample in, and then you just clip the top of the pipette, and then that can be your funnel. So more than likely with liquid samples, that's what you're going to have to do anyway. So I'm going to take my pipette, put it on top like a funnel, and then I'm going to get my ruler and try to measure about 1.5 centimeters. About 6 to 6.5 centimeters, no more than that for my NMR tube. So 6 is pretty good, and that's total. Now, your funnel could develop a little bit of a vacuum, so you want to make sure that every so often that you're making sure the liquid is actually going down. We don't want to put too much solvent. 1, the solvent's expensive, and 2, we just don't want to have too much. So I'm going to pipette my solution in through the top. And you might notice that it's starting to collect on the top. So I definitely need to make sure that it drains. And then I'm going to check that my solution is about 6 centimeters. So we're good. And then I can dispose of this glass pipette. If we want it to be really green, which I am going to be, I can actually reuse these pipettes and clean them. And so that's actually not a bad idea that we can reuse them and clean them. And so we're going to get a cap. The caps are in the organic lab. There's a little cubby with the caps, or I might have some caps available for you to use. So we're going to cap it, and then we're going to get our NMR label.